My name is Justine Yoon. I am 36 years old and I was born in Los Angeles. I grew up in the Los Feliz area, which is about 15 minutes from Koreatown, north of Koreatown. And my parents are still there today, so I still consider it like my home. My family was very nuclear. We just had my mom, my dad, my older brother, and my oldest brother. So I had two older brothers. One is 4 years older than me, and the other is 11 years older than me. So it was just the five of us growing up. And yeah, my parents were both immigrants. Mom came here when she was 25, back in 1967, and dad came here shortly after, maybe 2 or 3 years later, at 27, 28. So I'd say my parents' story is a little different from maybe like the traditional restaurant owner, because my dad started out as a clinical psychologist in Koreatown. Well, he started elsewhere, but his private practice was in Koreatown. And after a really long time of doing that and serving like the Korean community, he retired because at that time, basically the county was like, okay, you're 65, you gotta stop. And so at that time, he started thinking, well, like, I have so many dreams still. So he was like, I'm not gonna stop. So that's when he started looking into businesses. And he first found a business in Cyprus. It was a car wash. He had no idea what he was doing, but they did that for about 5 or 6 years. And after a while, they like started getting that like sort of appetite for, business. And they realized that they wanted to get a business in Koreatown, and they were specifically looking for a restaurant. And unlike other people, like my parents bought their businesses from previous business owners who had started those businesses. So they were lucky that they didn't have to start from scratch. During no part of my life did I really feel a lot of the ups and downs of my parents' like financial situation. I feel like they were really good about kind of like always keeping it at the same constant. But I can say that early on when he was doing that private practice up until he retired, that's definitely when we did well. And we were able to buy our home that we live in today. And so when he retired, it was definitely scary because all of a sudden, like, it was all based on this business that we had no experience with. So there were definitely times of hardship where I could see in my parents and their fights and things that there were hard times. My childhood was really, I think it was really active, I would say. And that's like not something I haven't heard from other friends of mine that are Korean American. We were all really busy. And I think part of that is like our parents wanting us to really like adopt American culture. So from 5 until, I was probably in high school, my mom signed us all up for sports. So we were in like the local leagues. So I grew up playing all kinds of sports, birthday parties all the time. Friends would come over. My parents were very open to people coming over. So I'd always have kids over. It was like crazy. My dad was really active in the Korean community. So it was really common to have people over at our house and have big parties and things like that sometimes. But it was different when we started working in the restaurant business because both of my parents then started working and my mom was no longer around. So, that was like the end of like mom's cooking for us. That was the end of coming home and someone being there. Now it's like, we have to let ourselves in, or we'd like sit outside in the backyard and wait for someone to come home. It'd be like hours. And at that point, it's kind of like you're on your own a little bit. Like schoolwork wise and everything, getting in trouble, it's like, well, you're kind of on your own. And so you're going to be accountable for anything you do. But we're not going to be necessarily there to like monitor you. But if you mess up, you're gonna get it like bad. Like we're over here working, so you can't just be like messing around. In my high school years and early college years, it was a lot of like, I was behind the kitchen. I was in the kitchen behind the front. I would like peel just like hundreds of potatoes. Like they'd just be like, okay, well, perfect, you're here. Here's some potatoes. And they would just have like 4 huge boxes of potatoes. Or you're going to clean these cabbages, these like hundreds of cabbages, peel these onions, like a lot of the, just a lot of the manual labor. That was like the only work I could do because the front of the house was all waitresses. And waitresses back at least then, in Koreatown, they're like straight, like they're honestly like pretty much like equivalent to gangsters. Like you can't say anything to them. They've been working in that role for longer than, like way longer than you probably have been alive. And what they say goes. And so, yeah, it's not like I got to go in and be like, I'm the boss's daughter, so I'm going to be serving. Oh no, you are going to the back. And you're going to learn how to do all this stuff in the back. After that, I think I graduated eventually, sort of, to doing more like delivery related stuff. Like I was the one driving a lot of times every other day. I'd have to like drive to the markets and pick up wholesale things and, you know, try to find the best deal on like kalbi, which is like, it's so difficult. And I'd have to go around literally scavenging for like kalbi ribs at different markets, driving like just across everywhere, you know, and like I knew all the market people in the wholesale district areas. And so we were all homies. And then after a while I graduated from that, I would say, as I got older, and as I'm getting older, I'm taking less and less of a role at the restaurant because I'm busy pursuing like my own dreams. And so it's like, well, they're expecting me to still help, but how can I help while I'm in grad school? How can I help while I'm in this full-time job? It was by being like I said, like the person who picks up all the supplies or the person who has to go get parts when something breaks, because something always is breaking, always. So it's like, we need this part for this thing. So I would be driving around trying to find those parts. So still feeling like I have this duty to help the family business, even though I'm fully trying to do my own thing. And then eventually, you know, I got to a point where my parents started getting really old. And so a lot of the things that, you know, when you're making sauces and things like that in the back, you're working with a really large volume. You're not making like this cute little thing of sauce. You're making like these huge bins of sauce and things that are going to last like a week. So eventually, like, my mom couldn't do that anymore. So she would teach me the recipes for the different sauces that went into the different dishes. And so, you know, typical day was like, call the restaurant and he'd be like, we're short of this. So I'd have to go over there, buy all the ingredients and then make the ingredients in the kitchen. And so eventually, like, my mom, I guess, like, trusted me enough to like tell me her recipes. And so, yeah, that was like my responsibility. So we used to go to this hole-in-the-wall restaurant. It was a sundaekgukjip, which is like the blood sausage. So it's like a blood sausage in a broth. And we would go there all the time. And I remember just spending maybe like a decade of my life going there. It would be me, my mom, my dad, and my brother. Probably the size of this room, like so small. It had like 7 tables. And we would go there, and the second we went there, the guy that owned it and his wife, they were the owners, they would immediately recognize us and be like, oh, I already know your order. Here's your 3 sundaeguks. Here's one for the gomash. I would just get this little bowl of seolleongtang, like broth, which is like beef broth. I don't know if it's simply because of that, and I ate it so often, but to me, seolleongtang is like my comfort food. Like when it's raining, all I want is that. When I'm super hungover, all I want is that. And it just feels like I'm eating home. For me personally, I don't care what these fancy chefs are saying, and I'm not gonna name any, but Korean food is comfort. Korean food is simple. Korean food is humble. Korean food, working in a restaurant, I can say this from experience, the number of ingredients that you need to make all these Korean dishes is very small. It's a very small number. And with that same set of ingredients, you can make so many dishes, right? And it's a very simple cuisine, and it's just really about that sonmat, which is like how your mom or how your grandma made it, which is what is like, dang, like your grandma's like whatever is like fire, you know? And it's just, Korean people, they don't, like, trying to learn how to cook Korean food is so frustrating because I'll learn from like so-and-so's mom who's like kimchi jjigae is mad, and I'm like, show me, and she'll teach me, and she's just like talking, just throw a little bit of this and then you're gonna throw a little bit of that, and then I try to make it at home and it's gross, and then I'll learn it from someone else and it's like she does it a little bit differently. And it's just, Korean food is just this idea that like you get whatever you have and then you just make it to taste, and it's not like crazy fancy, and it's not meant to be. I feel like that's what Korean food is. I feel lucky that I grew up the way I did because I feel like I'm very much in touch with my Korean culture in a lot of ways. But then at the same time, like I talk to some people who they're very out of touch with their culture, and it's not no fault to their own. They just weren't exposed to it in the way that I know that I was. You know, I grew up with these ideals of like hard work. You know, there's no limit, and that education is like key. Like you can't do anything without an education. And these are all good things. And family was always like a big thing, like almost to the point where it's like your image of our family is also like so important to keep, right? So it's like, that's not healthy. But I grew up with those values, which I think are like deeply rooted in me. But at the same time, I have these other values that are more like contemporary, where I feel like, for example, like I feel like I should do what I love, whereas my parents are like, do what you love. We didn't do what we loved. We just did what we had to do to make opportunities for you guys. So I don't know, it's like constantly this like, it's like still a constant battle and discussion that goes on in my head. My name is Justine Yoon, and this is my Korean American story.